Good evening and welcome. The night is calm now, and so are you. Let the world drift away for a little while. You're safe beneath the weight of your blanket, wrapped in stillness and gently suspended in time. Tonight, I want to take you far from here, not just in space, but in centuries, to the hushed, candlelit courts of old Europe, where kings slept uneasy and queens bore burdens too heavy for any crown. Close your eyes, if they haven't already fallen. Take a breath in, and now breathe out slowly, softly, and imagine a palace stone walls as thick as secrets, hallways darkened by velvet drapes and incense smoke. We are in the heart of the Spanish Empire. The year is 1649. Somewhere inside that grand and echoing maze, behind embroidered silk and gold doors, a girl sits very still, 15 years old. Her name is Mariana of Austria, princess, niece, and now bride. Tonight, she is preparing to marry her father's brother, her uncle. Let that settle in, gently, a truth that hums beneath history books and royal portraits. The mighty Habsburg dynasty, protectors of faith and empire, had for centuries practiced a unique devotion not to God alone, but to the purity of their bloodline, cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, again and again. The family tree twisted like a vine wrapped too tightly around itself, its fruit growing bitter, warped. And now Mariana has been chosen, not for her wit nor her dreams, but for her genes. She is to marry King Philip IV of Spain, her father's brother, 30 years her senior. A man she once called Tio, now to be her husband. The union, the court whispers, will ensure the line, protect the empire, please God. But who will protect Mariana? She does not speak. She listens to the low murmur of prayers, the soft creak of embroidered fabric as her maids dress her, cinching the corset until it steals her breath. Somewhere in the palace, a priest intones Latin verses she cannot hear. Somewhere closer, a dove flutters against the window, then flies away. They place a veil upon her head, lace so delicate it looks like frost. And still she does not move, because to move would be to shatter, because to cry would be to disappoint the entire world. And so she walks, down a marble corridor lit by trembling torchlight, through doors opened by footmen with powdered wigs and blank faces, toward a man twice her age, cloaked in red velvet, wearing the crown of Castile, her husband, her uncle. The wedding is magnificent, of course. They always are. Choirs echo through the cathedral. Gold drips from every candlestick. The ceremony is witnessed by nobles from across Europe, their jeweled gloves folded politely. But beneath the splendor, beneath the silks, the incense, the Latin blessings, there is only a contract. Her body for an heir. That night, she is led to a chamber no girl should enter without trembling. The sheets are clean, the fire is low. A priest has blessed the bed, as if prayer could make this natural. And when the doors close, the court stops pretending to care. 9 months later, Mariana delivers a stillborn child, and the court begins to whisper, not of her strength, not of her grief, but of her failure, a wasted pregnancy, a disappointment, the first of many, because in the years that follow, Mariana will become very familiar with silence, the silence after a child dies in her arms, the silence after a stillbirth, the silence of a chapel lit only by the candles of mourning, the silence of duty, the silence of being queen. By the time she is 20, Mariana has buried more children than most women ever bear. She kneels often now, alone, in the palace chapel. Her hands tremble against the rosary beads. Her prayers are no longer elegant or regal. They are desperate. God, give me a son, she pleads. Please, I will do anything. And then, in the winter of 1661, her prayer is answered. A boy, a living boy. But something is off. From the moment he draws his first breath, weak, wheezing, struggling to cry, something is different. The midwives exchange glances, but say nothing. They wrap him in linen, present him to the court. The trumpets sound. The heir is born. He is called Charles Carlos, in the Spanish tongue, Charles II of Spain, heir to the greatest empire in Europe. But even as the bells of Madrid ring in celebration, there are shadows behind the joy. The infant cannot nurse. His tongue is too large, his jaw misshapen, his face pale and puffy. Some say he looks like death in a christening gown. The Habsburg jaw, that unmistakable facial deformity, passed down through generations, is now exaggerated to an almost grotesque degree. His lower jaw juts forward so severely he cannot chew. He cannot speak clearly. He does not walk until the age of 8, but for now he is an infant, and as long as he breathes, the court will pretend. Mariana holds him in her arms that first night. The fire is warm. The nursemaids have withdrawn. Her son lies sleeping, wrapped in linen, his face soft in the glow. She touches his forehead. It is damp. His breath is shallow, his future already etched in the curve of his lips. And still, she loves him, fiercely, completely, because despite what he may become, despite what others will say, he is her child. And in the quiet corners of the palace, where no courtiers dare follow, Mariana becomes both queen and mother. But she is no fool. She sees the way the advisors look at Charles, the way priests speak of curses, the way foreign envoys whisper in coded tones about bloodlines and abominations. El Hechizado, some call him, the bewitched, as if the deformities are not man-made, as if the dynasty itself did not summon this tragedy with every uncle-niece union, every marriage contract scribbled in Latin and blind ambition. But Mariana remains silent. She raises her son as best she can. When King Philip dies in 1665, Charles is just 4 years old, too young to rule, too fragile to be seen, and so the burden returns to her. Mariana of Austria becomes Queen Regent, ruler of Spain in all but name, and behind her veil, behind her rosary beads and soft voice, is a woman sharpened by grief. She governs with steady hands, even as her son grows weaker, and as the empire begins to crack beneath the weight of inbreeding, gold theft, and holy wars. It is Mariana who holds it together. She is not remembered as a great ruler, but perhaps she should be, because long before Charles was called the Bewitched, long before Spain collapsed into war, there was a girl in a gilded dress, married off to her uncle, asked to save a nation with her womb, and for a time she did. Let us drift now, quietly forward. Spain, still swaddled in mourning black, has crowned a king too young to speak, and perhaps too weak to rule. Close your eyes once more. Let your breath become slow and easy. Imagine a great, candlelit nursery in the center of a stone palace. Tall ceilings where shadows cling. Cold marble floors softened by layers of wool and fur. The windows are shuttered, Spanish sunlight deemed too harsh for the boy's delicate skin. A cradle rocks, barely, silently. Within it lies Charles, son of Mariana of Austria, and King Philip IV, King of Spain, at just 4 years old. But unlike kings before him, Charles cannot walk. He cannot feed himself. He rarely speaks. Some say he doesn't even cry, a soft, wide-eyed thing, his head too large, his jaw too slack, his skin a pale parchment. The court doctors lean in. They press cold fingers to his limbs. They mutter in Latin, flaccid, hydrocephalic, retarded growth, and then always the unspoken diagnosis beneath the whispers, Habsburg. It's as if the boy is a mirror, held up to centuries of royal incest. Let me tell you a quiet secret. At the time of Charles's birth, he had more lines of inbreeding than most livestock. His father and mother were uncle and niece, yes, but also cousins in more than one direction. Their family trees didn't just tangle, they looped. By some genealogical estimates, Charles's pedigree chart contains fewer than 30 unique ancestors, where a healthy human of that generation would have 64. The result? A body built by repetition, a brain denied diversity, bones that softened instead of hardened, organs that never quite found their rhythm. But in the court of Spain, appearances were everything. And so, the game of masks began early. Whenever visitors arrived, Charles was presented in regal clothing, tiny stiff brocade jackets, velvet breeches, gold slippers, his hair curled into perfect black coils. On the outside, he looked like a doll. On the inside, things were unraveling. The boy could not read. He could not write. At 5, he did not yet speak in full sentences. By 10, he had only mastered a handful of phrases. "I am the king," he would say, when prompted, and nothing more. There were whispers. Is he cursed? Bewitched? Some blamed his wet nurse, a peasant woman rumoured to have one blue eye and one green. Others said it was the work of Moorish spells, or Jewish alchemy, or the devil himself, angered by Spain's persecution of heretics. But the truth was quieter and sadder. Charles's body was failing, and no spell could fix a bloodline that had consumed itself. And yet, life went on, as it always does, even in the halls of dying empires. Each morning, the royal attendants would lift Charles from bed, carefully, slowly, his spine curved like a question mark. They would bathe him in warm milk, rubbed with crushed herbs and perfumes. They would dress him in ceremonial armour that he would never wear in battle. His food was ground into paste. His water boiled, then cooled. And through it all, his mother watched. Queen Mariana, ever composed, ever praying. She ruled in his name, signed treaties in his name, declared war in his name. But at night, she returned to the same stone nursery, where her son sat quietly beside the fire, stroking a velvet cushion with fingers that trembled. He liked soft things. He liked the sound of wind through curtains. He liked the rustle of silk slippers on polished floors, and sometimes, though not often, he smiled. But behind that smile, pain simmered. Charles's body was a battlefield. His teeth grew in crooked and overlapping. His tongue remained so large he often drooled in public. He suffered from epileptic fits, chronic intestinal illness, severe headaches, endless infections. In private, he whimpered. In public, he said only what he'd been taught. "I am the king." Let's pause a moment here. Rest in this stillness. Listen to the fire crackle low. Let your own body relax, knowing how hard his struggled. Imagine waking each morning in silk sheets, but with legs that buckle under your own weight. Imagine being bowed to, but never truly heard. Now, let your mind wander to Charles's education, such as it was. He had tutors, Jesuits mostly, stern men with fine Latin and iron patience. But they were not allowed to discipline the boy. Not truly. To correct a king would be treason. So instead, they played games, taught him scripture through pictures, gave him miniature tools and blocks, hoping to develop basic motor skills. It never worked. His lessons ended in confusion, tears, and silence. By the time he was a teenager, Charles could barely sign his own name, and yet he was still the king, monarch of one of the world's largest empires. His signature sent men to die in the Americas. His seal approved invasions of North Africa. His face appeared on silver coins that crossed oceans. A boy king, a porcelain puppet. And around him, the wolves gathered, ministers, cardinals, ambitious nobles, each claiming loyalty, each whispering behind closed doors. Everyone knew Charles would not live long. He could not rule alone. The question was no longer if, but who would hold the reins when his body finally failed. And so, court life became a performance. Mariana played the loyal regent, but others vied for influence: foreign ambassadors, military commanders, rival dynasties. The court of Madrid became a glittering swamp of intrigue. Every glance weighed, every handshake catalogued. Alliances shifted with the tides, and at the centre of it all sat Charles, soft-eyed, small, swaying slightly in his throne. No one dared question his right to rule, but everyone questioned how long it would last. Still, the child survived, somehow, miraculously, into adolescence, into manhood. Though his frame remained childlike, though his mind never truly matured, he lived, and in time, it was decided he must marry, because Spain needed an heir, and, once again, the burden would fall on another woman's womb. Shh, hush now. Let the noise of the day slip away. We return now to the dim corridors of the Spanish royal palace, where stone floors echo with the softest footsteps, and silence hangs heavier than the tapestries on the walls. We are no longer watching a child, we are watching a bride. Her name is Marie-Louise of Orléans, and she is barely 16. The journey from France to Spain has taken weeks. Carriages bumping over rutted roads, the smell of horses and candle wax mingling inside the coach, the tight corset pinching her ribs until every breath feels like a prayer. She has never slept well since crossing the border. Now, she is here standing in a gold-threaded gown, beneath a frescoed ceiling, waiting to meet the man who is both her husband and her king. Imagine her heart fluttering like a trapped bird inside her chest, and imagine the long corridor before her, lined with guards and glowering priests, each of them wondering, will this girl save our dynasty? But none of them ask her name. Not really. They already know her purpose. Let's breathe for a moment. Just a slow inhale and exhale. This is not just a marriage. It's a transfer of ownership, from one throne to another, from Versailles to Madrid. She had grown up in opulence, but also in laughter. Her uncle, Louis XIV, was vain and shrewd, yes, but Versailles buzzed with life. Courtiers flitted like butterflies. The gardens smelled of oranges and roses. There were plays, operas, masquerades. But this Spanish court is different. The palace is colder. The candles burn lower. The air smells of damp wool and incense. Priests whisper behind doors. Eyes follow her wherever she walks. And then there is Charles. Let me describe him slowly, softly, with compassion, because cruelty is too easy. He is 22 when she meets him. His Habsburg jaw is so long and stiff, he cannot chew properly. His tongue is too large for his mouth, and his words tumble out half-formed, slow and slurred. His eyes, deep-set and dark, blink more often than they should, and his gait is unsteady, a child in a man's robes. But he tries. He bows when he sees her. He takes her gloved hand and kisses it with shaking lips. He offers her a rose, and Marie-Louise, barely more than a girl herself, does not pull away. She curtsies. She says thank you. She smiles even, because she knows. She knows this is not his fault, but what follows is something she cannot prepare for. The wedding night. Imagine the bed tall, canopied, draped in crimson velvet, a fire crackling low in the hearth. The room smells of lavender and beeswax. 2 goblets of warm wine sit untouched on a table, and then silence. Charles sits beside her, still in half his robes. His hands tremble. He reaches for her shoulder and stops. He mutters something. She doesn't understand. The moments pass. Long, long moments. Eventually, he lies down fully clothed and falls asleep, or pretends to, and Marie-Louise lies there, awake, staring at the embroidered ceiling, wondering if this night, this bed, this man is to be her forever. It is, because Charles is not well. Doctors later describe his condition in whispers. His genitals are underdeveloped. He cannot properly perform. Attempts are made tonics, stimulants, Spanish fly mixed into his wine. They consult priests. They consult alchemists. Nothing helps. Each month, when the Queen's courses come proof she is not pregnant, the entire court sinks into murmurs. They blame her. She must be barren. The French are all delicate, spoiled. She eats too much, rides too fast, laughs too loud. Marie-Louise begins to shrink into herself. The horses are sent away. The French books, confiscated. Her letters home, read by royal officials before posting. Yet still, she endures. Let's sit with her for a moment, in the stillness of her drawing room, the rain tapping against the stained glass windows, embroidery in her lap, untouched, a teacup growing cold on the tray beside her. She does not cry, not often, but she sighs, often enough to be noticed. And yet, through it all, something beautiful happens. The people begin to love her. She smiles when she can. She blesses their babies during public appearances. She requests plays for the commoners, opens the gardens to children, insists on pastries being delivered to nearby convents. They begin calling her La Querida Reina, the beloved queen. For a brief, flickering moment, she shines. But power never tolerates affection it cannot control. The Spanish court, ruled in whispers by Charles's stepmother, begins to watch her. Her ladies are interrogated. A French valet is sent back to Paris in disgrace. One cardinal accuses her of witchcraft. Still, she keeps her head high. But the strain begins to show. Her hair thins. She loses weight. She begins speaking less, smiling less. And then, one spring afternoon, she falls ill. At first, it is thought to be indigestion, but it worsens. She vomits. She collapses. The doctors are summoned. By dawn, she is dead, just 18 years old. The official report says, acute intestinal obstruction, but many believe she was poisoned. Some point to court factions eager to replace her with a more fertile consort. Others whisper about herbal mixtures slipped into her wine, or a slow-acting powder hidden in her daily bread. No one is ever accused. No one is ever punished. Charles locks himself in his chambers for 5 days. He does not eat. He does not speak. When he finally emerges, he is pale, trembling, and quieter than ever. He sits beside her casket in the palace chapel and whispers something no one hears. Later, he orders her portrait draped in black, and then he prepares to marry again, because a king without an heir is not permitted to grieve for long. Let your thoughts rest now with Marie-Louise, not just a queen, but a girl, a daughter, a flicker of light, gone too soon. And, as the candles burn low in her empty chambers, we turn now to the kingdom she left behind, a kingdom cracking beneath its own weight. Shh! Can you hear it? The stillness, that heavy, breathless silence that fills great palaces long after the crowds have gone, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like even the walls have forgotten how to echo. This is the sound of the Spanish Empire, near its end, a once great power, now held together by ritual and incense. And at the center of this crumbling kingdom sits a man barely strong enough to hold a quill. Charles II, they still call him His Catholic Majesty, but even his robes seem too heavy for his thin frame. He is only 24, but he looks twice that, hair thinning, eyes sunken, hands trembling, and all around him, ministers, priests, diplomats, all pretending he is well, pretending Spain is strong, pretending that time hasn't already passed them by. Let me take your hand now, gently, and guide you through these fading corridors of empire. We begin in the Council of State, where maps of the world still hang, marking territories the Spanish once ruled, Peru, Naples, the Low Countries, the Philippines. But if you look closer, the colours are fading. The silver mines of the Americas are dwindling. The Dutch have slipped free. The English raid Spanish ships with impunity. In the Mediterranean, Turkish pirates pick off galleons like seabirds tearing at a corpse. And yet, the court carries on as if none of it matters. Inside these halls, men argue over etiquette and court precedents. Who sits where? Who walks in first? Who holds the king's cloak? Meanwhile, the treasury is empty. No funds for soldiers, no silver for ships. Even the palace roof leaks in places, patched with old wood and prayer. And still, Charles signs decrees with shaky hands. He tries to read reports, though his eyesight is failing. He listens to advisers whisper, though he barely comprehends. He is surrounded, yet utterly alone. Let me show you a moment. It's a cold winter evening. The hearth in the king's chamber has burned low. A servant kneels, stirring the embers, while Charles sits hunched at his writing desk, staring at a letter he cannot read. Outside the window, snow dusts the rooftops of Madrid. Inside, a physician waits with a tonic, while a priest mutters a Latin prayer for health. Charles turns his head and asks, "Am I dying?" No one answers, because the truth is, the empire is dying, and the court knows it. Foreign ambassadors arrive in velvet cloaks, offering smiles and subtle threats. France watches hungrily. Austria sends cousins with marriage proposals. England writes letters pretending friendship, while funding Spanish rebels in secret. The vultures are circling, but Charles believes in his divine right, believes that God will grant him an heir, believes the Virgin Mary will protect Spain. Every week he visits sacred relics. He kneels before weeping statues. He wears scapulars under his robes and fasts during holy days. Some say he even performs secret penances, flagellation, barefoot processions, begging heaven to give him strength. But heaven remains silent. Let your mind drift now to the great Escorial Palace, nestled in the mountains, where Charles retreats more and more often. Its stone walls are thick, its courtyards vast and cold. Inside, there are more monks than ministers, more tombs than thrones. This is where Spain buries its kings. Charles walks here sometimes, slowly, dragging one foot slightly. He pauses at his father's tomb, Philip IV, the once glorious monarch. He whispers prayers for strength, for wisdom, for deliverance, and perhaps, deep inside, he wonders why his body is so weak when his faith is so strong. But even faith cannot stop the decline. The people suffer. Famine creeps across the countryside. Crops fail. Roads crumble. Merchants complain of overtaxation. Farmers flee to cities where there are no jobs. Bread riots erupt in Valencia. In Seville, half the population dies in a plague outbreak. Still, the royal court holds balls. Still, Charles dresses in brocade. Still, they announce feast days and processions, as if spectacle can smother starvation. But outside the palace gates, Spain grows restless. Let's visit one village, just one, a place near Toledo, where the olive trees no longer bear enough fruit, and the vineyards have withered in the sun. A mother wraps her child in rags. A baker stretches one loaf into three. A priest delivers last rites not once, but 5 times in a single day. And when word comes that taxes will rise again, the villagers light candles not in prayer, but in protest. And back in Madrid, the king is told, the people are loyal, and he nods, because he must believe it. By now, Charles is in his 30s. Still no heir, still no war chest, still no strength. His body breaks further. He can no longer walk unaided. His speech is increasingly slurred. His memory falters. He loses weight. He can barely digest food. At one point, a French envoy writes, "His body is but a breathing corpse. And yet," he continues, "because there is no one else. The Habsburg dynasty is bleeding out through its final branch, and that branch is barely clinging to the tree." In desperation, the court arranges another marriage, a new bride, a young Austrian princess, Mariana of Neuburg, brought to Spain like medicine for a dying patient. And for a time, there is hope, or at least the illusion of it. Charles smiles more. He tries to be kind. He attends council more often, but soon the pattern repeats. No child, no cure, no strength, and as the palace returns to its routines, as priests whisper, as ministers bicker, the empire continues to decay, quietly, relentlessly, like wood eaten from the inside. Let your breath slow here. Let the shadows stretch long across the polished floors of the throne room, because soon the bells will toll, not just for Charles, but for everything he was meant to preserve. And as night falls over the palace once more, we drift now toward the final days, the days when the empire's breath becomes a whisper, and the throne beneath Charles's feet begins to crumble to dust. The room was too quiet for a palace. The fire in the hearth had long since died, leaving behind only the faint scent of ash and a chill that crept along the marble floor like a ghost. Candles flickered low in their holders, their wax pooling into wide, milky puddles, and in the centre of it all, motionless beneath a canopy of crimson and gold, lay the body of a king. Charles II of Spain, once monarch of one of the most powerful empires on earth, was barely more than a breath in a gilded bed. The velvet drapes hung heavy around him, muffling every sound except the faint rattle in his chest. He was 38 years old, but looked far older, with hollowed cheeks and the kind of skin that sagged and thinned like old parchment. His jaw, grotesquely oversized from generations of Habsburg inbreeding, never quite shut properly. And yet, even now, even in these final hours, he was the king. Imagine, for a moment, watching a man who ruled the New World struggle to lift a goblet of water to his own lips. His hand trembles. A drop falls. A servant rushes forward, but it's too late. The king shakes his head gently. Even that hurts. he had once believed had been told that his suffering was God's will, that he was a martyr, born to purify the sins of the crown through illness and misfortune. But as the shadows grew longer and his breath grew shorter, even Charles began to wonder if perhaps it had not been God's punishment at all, but man's hubris that had shaped his misery. The inbreeding had done more than contort his face. It had weakened his bones, twisted his spine, and left him infertile. There would be no child, no heir, only silence after his passing, unless he chose. The whispers had started long before this night. Who would take the throne when the last Habsburg king drew his final breath? France, Austria, the papacy, they all had opinions, ambitions. But Charles had only memories of wives who wept for children that never came, of physicians who promised miracles and delivered leeches, of prayers muttered over his food, his bed, his aching joints. And yet, in his final moments, he alone would make the decision. A dying man would tip the scales of Europe with a flick of his pen. The Spanish court had grown quieter by the day. Courtiers tiptoed. Ministers held their breath. The Queen, his second wife, Mariana of Neuburg, had taken to kneeling outside his chamber, reciting rosaries until her knees blistered. She wanted power, of course. Not for herself, but for Austria, her family, her blood. But Charles remembered France, not with fondness perhaps, but with fear. A different kind of fear. Strategic, calculated. The kind of fear that respected strength. The kind that made men listen. One night, not long before the end, he called for Father Froilan, his trusted confessor. The priest arrived, wrapped in black wool, his breath puffing in the cold like incense. He listened as Charles whispered his regrets, his confessions, his memories. Then, softly, Charles made his final decision. His will would go to France, not Austria, not his wife's blood, but to Philip, Duke of Anjou, a Bourbon, a grandson of Louis XIV. Imagine, if you will, the chaos this unleashed. The Habsburgs raged. Maria Anna screamed so loudly that the guards outside mistook it for illness. The ambassadors scrambled. Treaties were unmade overnight. Across Europe, crowns rattled in their cases, uneasy. But Charles, pale and breathless, closed his eyes in relief. For the first time in years, he had done something alone. His choice, his legacy. The candle beside his bed sputtered. The priest gave him last rites. And just before dawn, as the sky turned the colour of bruised plum, Charles II exhaled and did not breathe in again. The silence afterward was profound, as if the palace itself had paused to listen. Outside, the bells began to toll. Inside, servants wept, not just for the king, but for the future they feared had just been born. The war of the Spanish succession would follow. Years of blood and fire and splintered thrones, but none of that had touched Charles. He was buried in the Escorial, among his ancestors, another portrait on a wall, another face twisted by fate and dynasty. His story a quiet one soon eclipsed by louder kings. But you and I, we remember. We remember the boy who was born broken, raised under chandeliers and shadows, taught to pray instead of play, to rule instead of rest. We remember the man who suffered in silence, who never knew the joy of his own child's laugh, who wandered a palace more like a ghost than a king. And, in his final hour, we remember the whisper, the scratch of a quill by which he changed the map of Europe. No battles, no speeches, just one dying command, one royal breath, and the world turned. Now, as the candlelight fades and the velvet curtains fall, let your breath soften too. Let the marble floor grow warm in your mind. The tapestries ripple gently in the imagined breeze. The king sleeps now, and so should you, for the past holds its peace tonight, and we are only its gentle listeners. They called her a widow before the king was even dead. The palace corridors whispered it long before the bells of Madrid mourned. Maria Anna of Neuburg, the queen consort of Spain, had walked a strange road first, as a Bavarian bride sent to patch the broken bloodline of the Habsburgs, then as the reluctant witness to her husband's unravelling. But when Charles II finally exhaled his last breath, frail, toothless, blind in one eye, and mentally dulled by decades of inbreeding. What remained of his widow was not a grieving queen, but something sharper, something silent and watching. The air in the Alcazar was thick with more than mourning. Smoke curled from censers as black-draped priests intoned Latin prayers, and beyond the courtyard, the streets of Madrid fell into ritual. Draperies were drawn, windows shut tight against light, and merchants paused their trade as tradition demanded. But inside the palace, Maria Anna was already at work, not with proclamations or speeches, no, those were for men. Her power was not in her voice, but in her gaze, her stillness, her command of the unspoken network of courtiers, maids, confessors, and secretaries who served her not the crown. She wore black, of course, layers of it, jet beads sewn into her bodice, gloves like crepe, and a veil that clung like cobwebs to her powdered skin. But her grief was not hollow, it was strategic. Grief gave her time to prepare, because the moment Charles died, November, honest, 1700, the game began. The throne was empty, the Spanish Empire unmoored, and kings from France to Austria sharpened their knives, each with a candidate to place upon it. And Maria Anna, born a princess of the Palatinate and trained in the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, knew how dangerous a vacuum of power could be. She had no child of her own, no son to place on the throne. That battle had been lost long before the grotesque legacy of Habsburg blood made certain of that. Charles had been sterile, likely since birth. His body, distorted by generations of familial breeding, had failed in every duty except survival. He had lived longer than any doctor expected, and she, Maria Anna, had been expected to produce a miracle with him. Now, with no heir, the Habsburg claim to Spain, already contested, teetered, and she stood at the crossroads of Europe's greatest inheritance crisis. The will, discovered days after his death, had shocked even the most jaded diplomats. Charles had named a Bourbon Prince Philippe, Duke of Anjou and grandson of Louis XIV, as his successor. France was elated, Austria was furious, and Maria Anna, she said nothing. She retreated into her chambers, as was proper for a widow, and lit candles for her late husband's soul. But behind that locked door, letters were written, carriages dispatched, envoys summoned in the quiet of dusk. Because if France claimed Spain, Maria Anna's family would lose everything. Her brother ruled in Vienna. Her loyalties were not only dynastic, they were personal. Madrid became a chessboard. The French ambassador arrived in pomp and ceremony, flanked by golden coaches and tricolour flags. Philippe, just 17, crossed the Pyrenees with royal tutors and tailors and promises of continuity. But beneath the surface, resistance simmered. Many in Spain, especially among the old nobility and Castilian clergy, did not trust France. They feared, Catholic though it was, France would bleed Spain of its independence, its silver and its soul. And Maria Anna knew exactly how to feed that fire. Without speaking publicly, she orchestrated dissent. She called in favours from bishops. She instructed her agents to circulate rumours softly, innocently, that Charles had been coerced in his final days, that the will naming a French heir might have been forged. She never accused anyone directly. That would have been unseemly, but she didn't need to. Her silence was the accusation. Her mourning was her protest. She dined alone, took no audience with French nobles, and sent back invitations to the ceremonies celebrating Philippe's arrival. When she did appear, it was in full mourning, unsmiling, as if Spain were not crowning a new king but preparing for a funeral. People noticed. Courtiers whispered. Priests wavered. What kind of queen mourns while her country rejoices? Philippe tried to win her over. He was young, intelligent, and advised by his grandfather's sharpest minds. But Maria Anna received him only once, briefly, coolly, beneath the high ceilings of the Hall of Mirrors in the Alcazar. Witnesses said she spoke no more than 5 sentences. One of them, allegedly, was, "Your Highness, Spain is not a gift to be passed from one hand to another." It was not a declaration, it was a warning, and she knew her audience. The true ears of court were never in the throne room, but among the pages and grooms and chambermaids who carried whispers between alcoves like wind. Her final act of defiance came months later. When the court prepared to relocate from Madrid to Seville for the summer, a tradition under the new Bourbon reign, Maria Anna refused to go. She claimed illness. She said the journey would kill her. In truth, she was anchoring herself in Madrid, in the very heart of Spain, where the Austrian cause still had loyal hearts. The French could not force her to leave. She was the Queen Dowager, and her apartments became a quiet fortress, a shadow court where loyalists still kissed her hand, brought her letters from Vienna, and swore allegiance to her family. Eventually, Louis XIV grew impatient. France could not afford a royal widow stirring trouble behind closed doors. An ultimatum was delivered. Maria Anna was to leave Madrid permanently. She would be escorted to Toledo, and from there sent to Bayonne, then ultimately back to Germany. She was being exiled from her adopted kingdom. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply packed. Her departure was silent, but every step of the carriage wheels echoed like a challenge. When she passed through the city gates, some said church bells rang, others said they tolled like a funeral. Either way, Spain felt smaller without her. In the end, Maria Anna did not win the war. The Bourbon line remained. Philippe would become Philip V of Spain, and his descendants would rule into the 21st century. But what she did in those silent months changed history. Her quiet resistance delayed French consolidation. It gave Austria time to prepare, and it set off the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal, continent-spanning conflict that would last 13 years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. All because one woman refused to smile at a coronation. All because a widow chose silence over surrender. So tonight, as we dim the lights and let this candle gutter low, remember her, not as the grieving wife of a broken king, but as the final fire of a dying empire. A queen whose power was not in her throne, but in the chill of her absence. The kind of woman who, when forced to bow, chose to vanish instead. And as we leave her behind, her black silhouette fading into the misty hills of Castile, let us rest. The bells are quiet now, the palace is still, and another chapter in our long night of history gently closes. Close your eyes now. Let the world grow dim around the edges. Perhaps you're resting your cheek against your pillow, or listening to the faint hum of night outside your window. Let me take you softly back in time, to a cradle that rocked in silence, in a royal nursery that should have held the future of a dynasty, but instead cradled the echo of centuries of mistakes. The year is 1661. The city is Madrid, and a child has just been born. His name is Carlos, and the moment he arrives, Spain starts to crumble. Imagine now a nursery dressed in silk, gilded woodwork on the walls, paintings of saints hovering in approval. A nursemaid hovers, but there's no joy in her face. The newborn cries weakly, his body limp, his skin almost translucent. The midwives share glances but say nothing, because this is no ordinary child. This is the only son of King Philip IV and Mariana of Austria. This baby is the heir to the mighty Spanish Empire. He is also, already, its undoing. You see, Carlos is the product of generations of inbreeding. Habsburg blood so pure, so carefully preserved, had turned into poison. Cousin had married cousin, uncle had wed niece. Again and again, until the family tree resembled a twisted vine. It was believed that keeping the royal line untainted ensured divine favour. What it created instead was a tragedy in slow motion, and Carlos, tiny and malformed, was the final proof. They called him El Hechizado, the bewitched one. Some whispered that he was cursed by witches, that devils had taken root in his mind. Others, more practical, knew the truth. He was simply a boy trapped in a body that never worked. He had a misshapen jaw so pronounced he could not chew food properly, his speech barely intelligible. He didn't learn to walk until age 4. He couldn't speak clearly until 8. And when he did, the words stumbled as his thoughts did. The court chroniclers, bound by duty to flatter, could only describe him as pious and obedient. They could not say he was dull or weak or utterly unfit to rule, but rule he did, because there was no one else. Now, let your mind drift a little. Picture the Spanish court of the 1670s, drenched in velvet and incense, Courtiers bowing, monks whispering prayers, ministers arguing behind closed doors, and in the center of it all, a young man thin as parchment, staring blankly ahead. His thick lower lip hangs slack. His hands tremble. His tutors try to teach him governance, but he drifts away mid-sentence. At times, he seems aware of his duties. Other times, he plays with toys meant for children half his age. Imagine a boy of 20 trying to learn how to read a ledger and asking instead for sweetbread. Still, Carlos was crowned king, and as the sun set behind the towers of El Escorial, Spain held its breath, because the empire, once the most powerful in the world, was rotting from the inside. Territories in the New World rebelled, Dutch ships harassed Spanish ports, Italy grew restless, and France, that great hungry neighbour to the north, watched with keen delight. Louis XIV saw Carlos as a candle flickering in a draughty room easy to snuff out, but still Carlos lived, and with each passing year the pressure on him to produce an heir grew unbearable. He was married at 18 to Marie-Louise of Orléans, a French princess known for her beauty and charm. The court hoped that perhaps love, or at least youth, would give Carlos the strength he lacked, but the marriage was fruitless. He was too sickly, too shy, too unsure of himself. His wife, trapped in the palace, fell into depression. She cried at meals. She withered like a flower kept from sunlight. And 5 years later, she died. Some said of sadness, others hinted of poison. Carlos remarried, this time to Maria Anna of Neuburg. Yes, the queen we whispered about earlier. She was clever, political, and determined. She tried everything: prayers, doctors, herbal remedies from the Alps. But still no child, no heir. The Habsburg line in Spain was dying, and everyone knew it. The palace physicians began to record his symptoms in excruciating detail. He suffered seizures. He lost his teeth. He had digestive troubles so severe he could not eat solid food. His hair fell out. He could barely walk, and yet he lingered. By the 1690s, Carlos became more symbol than sovereign. Ministers ruled in his name. Other monarchs debated who would succeed him, as though he were already dead. The Pope sent emissaries. France and Austria began mobilizing troops, and in Spain, the people lit candles, not for the king's health, but in anxious hope that peace might come before war broke out over his tomb. Carlos, poor soul, spent his last years in a kind of haunted fog. He became obsessed with exorcisms. He believed he was possessed. One of the most infamous rituals took place in 1698, when a Dominican friar performed a public exorcism on the king, commanding the devil to leave his body. Carlos wept, screamed, and reportedly vomited black bile, but no miracle came, only more weakness and more watching. Let us now wander to the final night of his life. It is November 1700, All Saints' Day. The palace is cold, the priests are chanting. The queen stands at his bedside, silent, and Carlos, just 38 years old but aged like a man of 80, breathes his last. He leaves behind no heir, no future, only a contested will, a broken empire, and the question that still haunts historians today: was he ever truly king, or just a puppet of history's darkest joke? So now, as we let this chapter drift into silence, imagine Carlos fragile, strange, mourned not as a ruler, but as a child born into an impossible burden. He was not evil, not cruel, just broken, a victim of love without science, tradition without wisdom. And as the palace bells toll faintly through the corridors of your imagination, may his sad story gently rock you towards sleep, because not all kings wear crowns with pride. Some carry them like chains. And now, let's close the door quietly behind us and prepare to wander next, not into royalty, but into the world of the everyday, the kitchens, the healers, the whispers behind the curtain, the people who watched, who whispered, and who remembered. Now, as you shift slightly under your blanket, perhaps nestling deeper into the comfort of your pillow, let your thoughts slip softly into the stone corridors of an old Spanish palace. We are not in the throne room tonight, nor wandering among noble courtiers or foreign ambassadors. No, this time, our journey takes us deeper to a quieter chamber, tucked behind thick velvet drapes and carved wooden doors. Inside, the scent is curious, a mix of dried lavender, clove, and something more bitter wormwood perhaps, or the sharp tang of mercury. We are in the healer's chamber, and here, even kings trembled. When Charles II of Spain grew ill, and he was always ill, it wasn't a physician who arrived first. It was the palace apothecary. Sometimes even the Queen herself would come, sometimes a monk, because healing in the late 17th century was not merely a matter of science, it was ritual, tradition, and belief woven together in a fragile thread. And when the royal body faltered, it took an entire kingdom's worth of potions and prayers to hold it together. Let me tell you what that looked like. Imagine a brass tray carried into the royal bedchamber, each item arranged with solemn care. On it, a vial of Spanish wine, dark, medicinal, fortified with herbs to stimulate the spirit. Next to it, a bowl of warm water, infused with rue and rosemary, to be dabbed on the temples. And beside that, a powder wrapped in waxed paper, powdered bezoar, made from the calcified contents of a goat's stomach, believed to draw out poisons. These were not eccentric remedies, they were standard royal treatments, expensive, rare, and mostly useless. The doctors who served the king often disagreed about diagnosis, about method, about everything. One swore by bloodletting, another by emetics, and still another would mutter about divine punishment. In 1693, when Charles collapsed and couldn't eat for days, the court physician recommended boiled toad essence to restore his humours. When that failed, he applied pigeon carcasses to the king's feet to draw out the fever. And when that failed too, they tried exorcism. Yes, a full ritual, candles lit, prayers chanted, demons named and banished. None of it worked, of course, but they kept trying. Because to treat a king was not just to treat a body, it was to preserve an empire, and to fail was dangerous. Now, picture the Queen Mariana sitting beside him, rubbing balm into his forehead while the fire crackles quietly. The shadows flicker across ancient tapestries. She dabs his lips with syrup made from quince and sugar, hoping to coax his appetite. A monk chants softly from the corner. The room is part sick room, part chapel, part battlefield. And it wasn't just Charles who suffered this way. The royals of Europe bred too closely, protected too carefully, often lived in fragile shells. The daughters fainted from corsets, the sons caught fevers and never recovered. The healers tried what they could, powdered pearls, deer antler marrow, crushed emerald, and always leeches. Leeches were considered balancing, restorative. A noble woman with a headache might be bled from her ankle. A prince with melancholia would have leeches placed behind his ears. One Habsburg queen reportedly carried a pouch of dried leeches sewn into her gown, just in case. You can almost hear the faint wet squelch, can't you? Don't worry, you're safe in your bed. There was also the matter of royal urine. You see, much could be divined from its colour, its scent, even its bubbles. Physicians kept delicate glass flasks for inspection. A good sample might earn a hopeful nod, a cloudy one, a worried whisper. And if the royal bowels didn't move, then came the clyster's lavender oil, salt water, or honey, gently administered. No dignity was spared in the name of healing. And yet, through all of this, something quietly miraculous happened. The kings and queens survived. Not always, not well, but they endured, year after year. And that, truly, was the healer's only job, keep the monarch breathing, whatever it took. Herbalists, often women trained outside the formal medical guilds, played a hidden role. They were called in discreetly, especially by the queens. A wise woman from the countryside might be summoned at night. She'd bring nettle tea for nerves, comfrey for wounds, or rue and angelica for warding off the evil eye. She might murmur charms under her breath while stirring broth. The palace physicians scoffed, but the royals listened. There was even a royal astrologer on hand because every good treatment had to be timed to the stars. Saturn ruled bones, Mars ruled blood, Venus the reproductive organs. To bleed a king under the wrong planet was dangerous. To prescribe a tonic during a waning moon could dull its strength. Medicine in those halls was a dance between heaven and earth. One of the strangest prescriptions came in Charles's final year. A Sicilian doctor proposed giving the king pulverized mummy. Yes, real human remains, imported from Egypt, crushed and mixed with wine. Supposedly, it contained ancient healing power. The priests objected, but the court tried it anyway. Charles vomited. The empire held its breath. And still, the king lived another season. But the worst part, perhaps, was hope. Every time a new remedy was tried, a foreign herb, a saint's relic, a gold-infused tonic hope would flicker in the queen's eyes. Maybe this time. Maybe this would bring strength, clarity, speech. But it never did. The royal body bore too much weight. It sagged beneath the sins of bloodlines. Too many expectations, too many prayers unanswered. So, the healers returned to their jars and herbs, their books written in Latin, their long spoons and carved wooden boxes. They kept trying. That was their silent vow. They could not cure, but they could soothe. And sometimes they could distract just long enough to pass another day. Let yourself imagine that now, a quiet morning, the king still asleep, his chamber filled with the soft smell of chamomile and beeswax. A gentle hand lifts the curtain. The sun glows pale against the window panes. A healer places her hand to the monarch's chest. The breath is shallow, but steady, and so the empire breathes too. As we step away now from those healing rooms filled with ancient scrolls and amber tinctures, from voices whispering prayers to saints, and the soft bubbling of water over flame, let yourself drift a little deeper. You're safe here. The healers have done their work. The world is quiet. The fire has burned low, and the potion for rest is already within you. It's late now. Perhaps you've adjusted your pillow just slightly, tugged the blanket up around your shoulders, letting your mind grow still. In this quiet hour, let's slip into a place few ever dared visit. Not the royal court, not the battlefield, not even the sick room. No, tonight I'll guide you to the edge of the mirror, and through it we'll see not just a king, but the reflection of an entire empire's sorrow. Imagine, just for a moment, standing before a great gilded mirror inside the Alcazar of Madrid. The room is hushed. A single candle flickers on a silver plate, and its light dances gently over the polished glass. And there, standing before it, is Charles II of Spain, a man, but barely, a king, and yet somehow not. The mirror doesn't lie, but it softens. Still, what it shows is a face twisted by generations of inheritance, a jaw that cannot close, a gaze that slips sideways, a presence more ghost than sovereign. Charles hated mirrors, or rather, he avoided them. For most of his life, others looked for him, measured him, whispered about him when they thought he couldn't hear. He has the face of a doomed saint, one Italian ambassador wrote, a living relic of his ancestors' pride, and that more than illness or weakness was the true curse. Not how Charles saw himself, but how others did, the way courtiers flinched ever so slightly when he turned, how visiting dignitaries described him in coded, painful prose. They called him gentle, quiet, unsuited to rule, but what they meant was deformed, stunted, sad, and still they needed him. You see, Charles wasn't just a man. He was a dynasty in flesh. The very blood of Spain, Austria, Burgundy, and the Holy Roman Empire flowed through his veins, too many branches twisted into one trunk. The result? A body crushed under history, and the world couldn't look away. Portraits of Charles II were carefully managed. Painters struggled to soften the features without lying. The famously receding chin, the large tongue, the watery eyes, all made royal painters sweat behind their easels. Some chose to depict him in armor, hoping the gleam would distract from the flesh. Others painted him alongside dogs or saints or angels, as though to frame his body within symbols of loyalty and grace. But the truth always bled through, no matter how much gold leaf they applied. Let me tell you something curious. Many ambassadors kept coded journals. In them they tracked not only Charles's political actions, but his posture, complexion, appetite, even his speech. One Venetian wrote, "The king mumbles like a child and cannot eat without assistance." Another observed, "His Majesty walks as if the floor might give way." And still, these men bowed before him. They smiled. They praised his piety, his lineage, his royal bearing, because even a broken king had power. Even a monster could command fear. The Spanish people, by contrast, rarely saw him. He was a distant figure, glimpsed on balconies, described in proclamations, prayed for during Mass. Rumours filled the void. Some whispered that he was cursed born during a lunar eclipse, swaddled in black cloth, teeth like a dog's. Others claimed he was a saint, touched by heaven, his pain a sacrifice for the sins of Spain. Both stories, in their way, made sense. The truth was quieter, and therefore harder. He was simply a boy who never stood a chance. Imagine now a court painter, brush in hand, eyes downcast, tasked with portraying this king. The candlelight flickers. Charles sits in a stiff chair, robes heavy with embroidery. The painter tries to avoid staring at the jaw, the hands that tremble, the slurred commands. He sketches slowly, carefully, adjusting angles to offer dignity without falsehood, because in these portraits, Spain is also looking at itself, and what it sees is fading. One of the most haunting images of Charles II is a painting done late in his life. He stands beside a hunting dog, thin, pale, with a distant stare. His clothes are opulent, but his stance is limp. There's no strength in his arms, no pride in his gaze, and the dog, seems healthier, more alert, more alive. And yet, Charles insisted on being painted, because part of being king, especially in those centuries, was being seen, even if it hurt, even if you knew people would whisper after you left the room, even if every stroke of the brush reminded you of what was missing: a strong jaw, a commanding brow, a sense of future. Let me pause here and ask gently, what would you do if every glance toward you was also a judgment? Would you have stood as still as Charles did? Would you have smiled? History was never kind to him. After his death, they dissected his body. Yes, quite literally. Doctors performed an autopsy and declared, rather dramatically, that his corpse contained no blood, only black liquid, and that his heart was the size of a peppercorn. These reports were likely exaggerated, meant to justify what everyone already believed, that Charles had been doomed from birth, a king in title, a shadow in substance. But is that fair? Consider this. He lived to age 38, ruled for over 30 years, held an empire together barely, but still in the face of constant war, betrayal, and dynastic collapse. And he endured it all with almost no allies, few victories, and constant pain. That, in its own strange way, is a kind of courage. The mirror never stopped watching him. It lived in the eyes of his subjects, the quills of foreign scribes, the whispers of palace maids. Even after his death, his reflection lingered in treaties, in portraits, in the war that followed. He didn't leave an heir, but he left an impression. Now, as we draw away from the mirror's surface, let the candlelight fade, and feel again the softness of your own bed. No more stiff chairs, no silk robes, just quiet, stillness, a safe place to rest. The world no longer needs to watch. The mirror is turned to the wall. And in this piece, perhaps we can offer Charles something no one else could: silence, without judgment. Let your eyes close gently and breathe in deeply. The night has settled. The story can wait until morning. The king, at last, has laid down his crown. The room was too quiet for a palace. Even the footmen had stopped whispering. Candles burned low in the thick air of the Alcazar. Their flames quivered not from breeze, but from the sheer weight of anticipation. Outside, the entire court held its breath. And somewhere far beyond, the Empire of Spain, fragmented, exhausted, gasping, waited too, for the moment when Charles II, last of the Habsburg kings, would finally close his eyes and not open them again. He lay beneath thick velvet. The royal colour faded from rich crimson to something closer to rust. His face was pale, sunken, the long jaw slack. His eyes were half-lidded, clouded. The priests had come already. They had given the last rites 3 times that week alone, each time thinking, surely now. But the king, ever stubborn in his weakness, had held on. As if time were another battlefield, he refused to yield. There's something profoundly still about a royal deathbed. It doesn't feel like passing, it feels like the end of a performance. And, in Charles's case, what a long, reluctant play it had been. A life lived in pain, under the gaze of courtiers, diplomats, midwives, and physicians. No privacy. Not in birth, not in marriage, and now, not even in death. The Queen was there, of course, his second wife, Mariana of Neuburg. She sat beside him, dutiful, dry-eyed, her face composed like carved marble. She'd been younger when she arrived, vibrant, clever, but the years with Charles had worn her thin, not with cruelty, but with despair. There had been no children, no dynasty renewed, and now, no future to pretend toward. Imagine standing at the foot of the bed, candlelight flickering on oil paintings of saints and ancestors. A crucifix rests on Charles's chest, his hands folded over it. Somewhere in the rafters, a dove coos. Or maybe it's just the wind. The room is too warm, the velvet curtains too thick. The air tastes like incense and regret. Doctors had done all they could. They bled him, fed him, crushed emeralds, bezoar stones, holy relics ground into powders. They called in astrologers. Liturgical processions circled the palace, praying for divine intervention. But there are no remedies for centuries of inbreeding, no antidote for fate. Let me tell you something almost too strange to believe. In his final months, Charles became convinced that he was cursed. Not metaphorically, literally. He believed witches had cast spells upon his body, draining his life, clouding his seed, weakening his spirit. He ordered exorcisms. He demanded investigations. Priests combed the palace for signs of sorcery, hidden amulets, written spells. They found nothing, except fear. And yet, the fear was real, because when a dynasty dies in silence, everyone listens to the echoes. The nobility looked at each other across velvet-draped hallways. The bishops clutched their crosses more tightly. Foreign ambassadors wrote frantic dispatches back to Versailles, to Vienna, to London. "He cannot live the month," one scribbled. "The body is too decayed, the eyes see nothing. He mistakes the Virgin for his mother." But still, Charles breathed, barely. And here's something heartbreakingly human. In those final days, he asked to see portraits of his ancestors. They were brought into the room frames, leaning against the walls, candlelight catching on golden curls, sharp Habsburg chins, stern imperial brows. One by one they gazed upon him. The conquerors, the kings, the women who married cousins to preserve the bloodline, the children who did not live long enough to speak. Charles looked at them, and they looked back. What passed between them is lost to history. He died on November 1700, All Saints' Day. A day of remembrance, a day when, in churches across Spain, the faithful whispered prayers for the dead. And on that day, Spain lost more than a man. It lost the center of a dynasty, the glue, however frail, that held together an empire. When the news spread, people didn't cheer, they didn't riot, they wept. Even those who feared him pitied him. Even those who had schemed against him, ambassadors, rival claimants, would-be heirs, felt the cold breeze of finality when they heard the bells toll. Let me pause here, just for a moment. Let's light a small candle in your imagination. Place it beside his bed. Watch its flame dance gently, reflecting off silver, gold, and the still surface of an untouched mirror. Feel the warmth it gives, and how little warmth the room holds in return. His autopsy, as we discussed before, was more myth than medicine. No blood, they claimed, no brain, a single testicle, a rotten heart the size of a withered almond. These reports were theatrical, but their purpose was clear: to turn the man into a symbol. Charles's broken body was no longer just a body. It was an indictment, a warning, a legend. With Charles's death, the War of Spanish Succession ignited, a conflict that would stretch across Europe for over a decade. Because when one man carries an empire in his veins, his death is never quiet. It echoes across borders, stirs the ambitions of kings, redraws maps, and buries soldiers by the thousands. But here, now, let's not concern ourselves with treaties or battles. Let's stay in this room a little longer. The fire has gone out. The priests have left. The queen has retired to her chambers, face dry, heart heavy. The palace is silent, save for the ticking of a distant clock. And in the stillness, something almost holy settles, a sense of peace. The kind that only comes after a long, long sorrow has ended. You and I, we've walked beside Charles through his strange, haunted life. We've seen him as a boy, a king, a shadow, a mirror. We've seen the sorrow behind the crown, and now we see nothing, just rest. Let that image hold you. Let it settle into your mind like a soft velvet curtain falling over a stage. Let yourself drift, because here, at the end of our story, the noise of history has faded. There are no armies marching, no courtiers scheming, no physicians bleeding, no candles sputtering. There is only quiet. And in that quiet, maybe, just maybe, Charles II, broken heir of broken empires, has found something he never had in life: peace. If you've drifted into dreams during this story, may they be gentle and full of stars. And if you're still here, thank you for walking with me through this soft and sorrowful chapter of forgotten history. Until next time, sleep well and good night.